What's going on, guys? It's Cimo, and welcome to another episode of Deck of the Week. If you missed the first episode, I'd highly recommend checking that out because we covered penguins of all things. This is a new series I'm doing that's a little bit Pojo inspired. Instead of doing a card of the day, I wanted to do a Deck of the Week where we got to feature a deck that may be meta relevant, that may be an upcoming rogue contender, or something that would like never otherwise get featured, just so we can talk about it at a more in-depth level. So today, oh boy, we're going to be talking about, I don't even want to call this Gravekeeper because it's playing like 4 actual Gravekeepers in the deck. This is more like Necro Valley Dragoon Turbo. I think that might be a more fitting name, but this is actually a deck that won a win-a-box at the most recent Yu-Gi-Oh! Extravaganza because guess what? Necro Valley hoses about 90% of the metagame right now, and so this is something that you might want to take note of. If you don't know Necro Valley, its most recent errata, this might be the most errated card in Yu-Gi-Oh's history. Someone can check for me, but Necro Valley states all Gravekeeper monsters gain 500 attack and defense. Okay, whatever. Cards in the graveyard cannot be banished. Negate any card effect that would move a card in the graveyard to a different place. Negate any card or effect that changes types or attributes in the graveyard. So when you think about this in the context of the current metagame, when we have Eldritch, when we have Drytron, and when we have Virtual World running around, yeah, Necro Valley is actually insane. Now, obviously, it does fold to some things, but what deck doesn't, right? So the whole purpose of this deck is to establish Necro Valley, establish Dragoon, and then you basically just win the game, right? Because your opponent's most likely not going to be able to play through Necro Valley, let alone get through Dragoon plus Necro Valley, because most of your ways to possibly even out this card, Dragoon can just stop, and that just wins you the game automatically. So this is one hell of a deck, and again, this did win a win-a-box because guess what? It versed 3 Drytrons straight in a row, so if you're able to set this up, you probably just win the game and your opponent can't do much about it. So I wanted to talk about this deck a little bit in depth because I just thought this was hilarious. If you want to go ruin people's days online, I would recommend playing this because this deck is just a disaster. So let's go ahead and do the card by card. First up, we've got 3 copies of Gravekeeper's Commandant. This is a card that you can discard to add a copy of Necro Valley from your deck to your hand. It's also just a 1600 beater, 2100 with Necro Valley, so it's not the worst. This card is just incredible. Basically, it's just your 3 copies of Terraforming for the Necro Valley. Great card. We also have 1 copy of Gravekeeper's Headman. This is a card that says if this card is summoned, you can target a level 4 Gravekeeper monster in your graveyard, special summon it in attack position or face down defense position. You can only use this effect once per turn, and it's unaffected by Necro Valley. So what's cool about this is that you could pitch Commandant, add Necro Valley, summon Headman, get back Commandant, and just like that, you have a link to play. And guess what you can do with that? Go into Anaconda, get your Dragoon. Just like that, you have the game. 1 copy of Red Eye's Wyvern because we need this for Red Eye's Insight, but this is a way to get Dragoon back if our opponent does have a way to out it. 1 Dark Magician and Red Eye's Black Dragon because we are playing Dragoon, and that is all we need. That is it for the monsters in this deck, ladies and gentlemen. This deck solely relies on the back of Dragoon. I absolutely love it. So next up, we have a copy of Dark Ruler No More and 2 copies of Forbidden Droplet. I believe the player of this deck said this should be a 3rd copy of Droplet, but they just didn't have access to it. And so Dark Ruler No More is the effective replacement here. This allows you to just stop your opponent's plays, whatever they may set up. If it's like, you know, anything with like Vanity's Ruler or Herald of Ultimateness. If you're looking at something like Drytron, maybe if you're looking at True King of All Calamities in the Virtual World department, these are just the equalizers to allow you to get set up, get the Necro Valley online, and help stabilize the board. We also have a copy of Mystic Mine. This is like the tertiary or secondary win condition, depending on how you're looking at it. Mystic Mine is okay against some decks, but against some of these like slower control decks, it doesn't really do a whole lot. If you do, however, encounter some sort of combo deck that doesn't play out to Mystic Mine, you've got stuff like Metaverse to be able to use this instead of going for the Necro Valley, so you have this alternate way to deal with the combo decks as well as the control decks with Necro Valley. We're, of course, playing 3 Necro Valley because this is our deck's win condition. Without this, this deck is terrible. We also have 3 copies of Necro Valley Throne. This card is actually really cool. It is a Rhoda, so you can add a Gravekeeper monster from your deck to your hand on activation, or immediately after this effect resolves, normal summon a Gravekeeper monster, and you can only use the effect once per turn. So this is like 9 copies of Necro Valley, essentially, or you can use this to double summon both Commandant and Headman to get to a Link 2. Pretty cool card, but I'd say 99% of the time you're using this just to get here, to get to Necro Valley. 3 Extravagance, you do not care about the downside here because you have 3 Dragoon, you have 3 Anaconda, so hopefully you don't banish them all, otherwise you're probably going to lose. 3 copies of Red Eye's Fusion because we need to see this every time, as well as as 3 Red Eyes Insight to help with that consistency. 3 copies of Royal Tribute. This is, I guess, the secondary win condition I was alluding to earlier, because if you're able to get Necro Valley up, which let's be honest, doesn't seem too difficult in this deck, if you are going first, you can just Royal Tribute your opponent, and let's think about how devastating this is. With these decks like Virtual World and Drytron running around, if everything gets sent to the graveyard when their deck is comprised of so many different monsters, yes, Drytron doesn't really care as much because it does have a way to come back, but guess what? Necro Valley's up. So if Necro Valley's up, they're not going to be doing anything, and you probably just won the game. So priority number 1 is getting to Necro Valley. Priority number 2 is if you can Royal Tribute them, you do it. And then priority number 3 is to Dragoon to protect Necro Valley to ensure that you can win the game. We also have a Terraforming for consistency, and moving on to the traps, 3 copies of Crackdown. This is also another way that we can actually just get monsters off the field. We have a Dryden in the extra deck, so that's nice against all the Zodiac Eldritch decks running around. We can just take a Zoo monster, stack our own Dryden, so then we have a way to actually pop our opponent's stuff. But this is just good to disrupt their plays. We get to take the monster, so that keeps them off of going to Xyz plays, into Link plays, and the like. 1 copy of Metaverse. We already talked about this a little bit. It's just another Terraforming and Trap form. 3 copies of Solemn Strike. This is just another way to protect the board if you get Necro Valley set up. And hell, even if you get Dragoon set up and your opponent finds a way to like bait the Dragoon negation and has a card that can out it, like let's say something like Zeus, you can then use the Solemn Strike on the Zeus, and then it's just game over because then they have no out. Torrential Tribute's also in here, and I actually love this. Torrential's just such a good equalizer because even if you fail to get to your main win condition, Torrential can just slow the game down and ensure that you get a little bit of time to get there. If you're staring down a true King of all calamities on turn 1, if it's Virtual World, you can just set Torrential. You can probably pass. You can Torrential your opponent's board because they can't kill you otherwise. And then on the following turn, set up with Necro Valley, and you probably win the game that way. The extra deck is pretty straightforward. We got 3 copies of Dragoon. We have 1 Dryden for the Crackdown, as aforementioned. 1 copy of Alsa. This is also important too because with Alsa, we can actually just take the Zodiac monster from the opponent altogether, and that way we can just slap our own Dryden on top. What's nice is that the Gravekeepers are actually, or excuse me, Commandant is an Earth, but you only need 1 Earth monster to make Alsa, so that's really nice. 2 copies of Geonator Transverser. I actually love this card, but it just doesn't really see that much play. It requires any 2 effect monsters to link to. This linked card and monsters it points to cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects, and if this card points to 2 monsters, you can switch control of those monsters, and you can only use the effect once per turn. So it's basically creature swap. There's some cool shenanigans to be had there, and it makes your opponent think about their monster placement in their main monster zone. We also have 2 copies of Nightmare Cerberus, 3 copies of Phoenix, and 3 copies of Verte Anaconda because we need to make sure we get to Dragoon. For the side deck, 3 copies of Droll and Lockbird. Obviously, Droll is a hedge against stuff like Drytron and some of these other decks that are able to just add a bunch of cards to their hand, so this is going to come in if they know they're going up against Drytron. 3 copies of Inspector Border. I believe at this past weekend's 3v3 LCS, there were several top players playing Inspector Border decks, and Inspector Border is a very interesting card when we get into some of these formats. This is a card that everyone just always groans when they see because it has so much text. The card is so confusing, but being able to hose monster effects in a stun deck like this, especially if you have Necro Valley up, I don't think you're going to complain about that. We also have 2 copies of Cosmic Cyclone, as well as a Harpy's Feather Duster and 2 Lightning Storm for back row removal. Another Dark Ruler no more. I'm not sure if this is actually supposed to be Dark Ruler or if it's supposed to be something else, but it's fine if you're going up against combo decks or any decks that build boards that are difficult for you to break. And then 3 copies of Solemn Judgment. These can come in when you know you're going first. Maybe you, let's say, lost a game and you want to go first in game 2. You can bring these in. You have more protection for stuff like your Dragoon, for stuff like your Necro Valley, and Solemn Strike, you can always pay for it, so that's the best part. So that wraps it up for the deck itself, but now I'm going to go ahead and take this into solo really quick because I just want to see how consistent this deck is at making Dragoon plus Necro Valley. All right, so we're queuing up solo mode here, and let's see what we can do. So this starting hand here actually will get us, this is the dream, right? So you just pitch the Commandant, you can get a copy of Necro Valley straight from the deck. We can then go ahead and fire that off. We can Royal Tribute the opponent, so we can get rid of everything in their hand, and then we can just follow that up with Red Eyes Fusion, and we also have a Solemn Strike to set in the back row as well. If we were going to be going second, we have Dark Ruler no more in addition to all of that, so that way we'd be able to possibly play through what our opponent has, that's like the dream, right? So what I want to do is I just want to fire through some hands here to see how consistently we can achieve this and see if this is a bit viable. So, okay, we have the Necro Valley Throne. So this means we have access to Necro Valley, but we're missing the Dragoon half of the deck. So we need to start with Extravagance because Extravagance needs to be used at the start of main 1. And let's go ahead and hope for the best. Let's see if we can get into the Dragoon engine. And it looks like we did because we have the Red Eyes Insight. So again, this is a pretty decent hand. This has everything you could want. You also have the Solemn Strike as a follow-up, Forbidden Droplet for if you're going second. All right, we're 2 for 2. Let's see how far we can go. Let's see how long it takes for us to get a hand that cannot at least end on Necro Valley plus Dragoon. And this hand right here, you're already good. You have the Fusion, you have the Terraforming, which gets you to Necro Valley. Let's just see what we would draw off of this Extravagance just for fun. And we'll draw 2. And look at that. There's the Commandant. There's the Strike. That's everything you could want. All right, 3 for 3. Let's keep going. I'm actually impressed with how consistent this is. This is actually pretty cool. And okay, I mean, we're missing the Necro Valley. So we have the Insight and we have the Royal Tribute, but we definitely need the Necro Valley. Now, we have a lot of ways to get there. It does suck that we drew the Red Eyes Black Dragon because that's basically a dead draw. Oh, okay, so there we go. So the first out of 4 hands, we did not actually get to our Necro Valley. So that's a bit unfortunate. We can still make Dragoon, which is like fine, but again, Dragoon's Dragoon, right? And then there's not really a lot of counterplay there because you have to remember, we're doing these hands with your opponent not having any way to interact with you. Ash Blossom's probably going to be your biggest fear playing this deck. There are a couple of other cards, but I think Ash is probably going to be priority number 1. Let's keep going. So we are 3 out of 4. These are super quick, so we can do a lot of these. Let's see what we get. All right, so here's the Commandant, and here's the Necro Valley Throne. So this is really cool. This was the play I was actually alluding to earlier. So you can go pitch the Commandant. We can actually just get the Necro Valley off of this. And then what we can do is we can use the Necro Valley, and we can use the Headman here, and then use the effect to get the Commandant back. And just like that, we can make Verte Anaconda that way, and then have access to our Dragoon. We could also use Necro Valley Throne instead if we want to be a little bit safer. So that way we can summon the Commandant straight from our hand, but then we wouldn't have access to Necro Valley that way. So there's a bit of a trade-off there as well. But all right, so we're 4 out of 5 now, I believe. Let's see what we're going to get on this hand. Ooh, this is probably not the best. We can still make Dragoon. Dragoon plus Strike, Crackdown, and then possibly Mystic Mine Droplet. Let's see if we were going second what we would get. There's an Insight, so that's a little bit redundant. But if you're going first, Dragoon plus Strike, Crackdown is pretty strong. Like, let's be honest. Yeah, it's not like game winning necessarily, but all right, 4 out of 6, 4 out of 6. I think I'm going to go for 10, and then I think we're going to call the video. Here's a Commandant. Here is a Red Eyes, or excuse me, there's a Necro Valley and a Red Eyes Fusion. We have the Commandant anyway. So that's Necro Valley plus Dragoon. That's all we could ask for. Man, that Red Eyes Black Dragon is just glued to our hand. And this is another hand. We have the Necro Valley, we have the Royal Tribute this time, and we also have the Fusion or the Insight in this case. Let's go ahead and do another one. See if we can keep going. All right, so we're missing the Necro Valley half here. So let's see if Extravagance can get us there. And it does not. Okay, so Dragoon plus Torrential Tribute still pretty strong. You have a negate. Torrential can clear the board if things are getting out of hand, but the rest of your hand is looking a little bit dicey. Plus, you keep drawing this Red Eyes Black Dragon of all things. Let's go ahead and do one more hand, see how this looks. Hope for the best. And I mean, this is, you don't have access to Dragoon in this hand, but having Necro Valley plus Royal Tribute might just win you the game regardless. I think it would depend on the matchup, but you also have Strike and Crackdown in addition to that to hold them off for a bit. Let's go ahead and draw that 6th card. And there's the Commandant, so that's a little bit redundant because we already have the Valley, but at least it's a 2100 body. The nice thing is Crackdown plus Commandant then will allow you to make the Anaconda, which will then get you to the Dragoon and help solidify your win condition. That's another reason why Crackdown's actually pretty good in this deck, just for that free link material. But overall, I'm actually really impressed. Like, this deck is rather consistent, and I didn't think it was going to be. And if you're up against a metagame that's just swarming with Drytron or any of these like graveyard focused decks, this may be something you want to play just for fun, just to piss them off, because I think you would really succeed at doing so. So guys, that's going to wrap it up for this episode of Deck of the Week. I really hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think. Thank you so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always. Subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. And if you found this video informative, consider supporting me on Patreon for exclusive one-day early access to both the Yu-Gi-Oh Progression series and the history of Yu-Gi-Oh. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we will see you next time.